There is a particular kind of loneliness that is not about being alone in a room. It is about being alone in a room full of people who are watching you fall and smiling while they do it. Courtroom 7. Mid-morning light falls through tall, dusty windows in slanted columns. The room smells of old wood, legal paper, and quiet judgment. Seraphina Vale Ashford sat at the plaintiff's table, alone. Not figuratively, not poetically, literally, physically, devastatingly alone. No attorney beside her, no family member in the gallery, no hand resting on her shoulder, no whispered reassurance, just a woman in a gray wool dress. A leather folio of documents arranged with surgical precision, and 2 small pearl earrings catching the light as if they were the only things in the room still holding beauty. She kept her eyes forward. Across the aisle, Dorian Ashford sat flanked by a team of 4 attorneys. 4 from the city's most prestigious family law firm. His new fiancée, Margot, sat directly behind him in the gallery, draped in ivory and entitlement, her hand occasionally reaching forward to touch Dorian's shoulder as if she were consecrating a champion. Around them, Dorian's business partners, his college friends, his mother, Pearl, clutching in a front-row seat, whispering to the woman beside her with barely concealed delight. The gallery was full. Seraphina's side was empty. Every seat empty. A slow pan across the hollow bench, 7 empty seats. A terrible, visible silence. She had no one. Or so the room believed. Dorian turned slightly in his chair, not enough to be obvious, just enough to survey his empire of support, and then he let his gaze slide across the aisle to Seraphina. He smiled, not with warmth, never with warmth. It was the smile of a man who has calculated the odds, confirmed his advantage, and is already composing his victory speech. His lead attorney leaned toward him and said something quiet. Dorian laughed, soft, private, cruel, and Seraphina watched. She picked up her pen. She uncapped it carefully. She drew a single, clean line across the top of her notepad. And she waited, because Seraphina Vale Ashford knew something that no one else in that courtroom knew yet. The story had not started. The proceedings had begun 40 minutes before, when Judge Hargrove Elspeth had entered, settled her reading glasses onto the bridge of her nose, and surveyed the courtroom with the quiet omniscience of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by what human beings do to one another. She had noticed immediately, as sharp eyes always do, the asymmetry. One side of the courtroom, abundant, polished, armored with legal talent. The other side, one woman. One leather folio. 2 pearl earrings. Dorian's lead attorney, a man named Fletcher Mace, known throughout the city's legal circles as the shark in the bespoke suit, had opened proceedings with the confidence of a man who had never lost and did not believe loss was a category that applied to him. He had risen from his chair with the theatrical ease of a performer who knows the audience is already his. "Your Honor," Fletcher Mace began, his voice rolling through the courtroom like expensive bourbon, smooth and intoxicating and capable of great damage. "The facts of this case are not complex. They are, in fact, quite simple. My client, Mr. Dorian Ashford, entered a marriage in good faith. He supported this household. He built this financial life. And he is here today to ensure that the division of those assets reflects the truth, not a narrative of victimhood constructed by a woman who contributed nothing of substance to this union. Nothing of substance." The words landed in the room like dropped crystal, sharp and reverberating. Seraphina did not flinch. She wrote something in her folio. Deliberately, unhurriedly, in the gallery behind Dorian, Margot covered her mouth with manicured fingers in a performance of discomfort that fooled no one who was actually paying attention. Dorian's mother nodded with the satisfied gravity of a woman whose opinion of her former daughter-in-law had been publicly validated. The murmuring in the gallery was soft, but it was present. It was the murmur of people watching someone drown and debating whether to throw a rope, deciding not to. Fletcher Mace continued his opening, and with every sentence he stripped Seraphina's 7 years of marriage down to its most transactional bones. No acknowledgement of her role as the emotional architect of that household. No mention of the years she had quietly managed Dorian's social calendar, his business relationships, the intimate diplomacy of every dinner party that had advanced his career. No mention of the creative consulting work she had quietly suspended when Dorian had asked her politely, then persistently, then with the particular pressure of a man who frames requests as sacrifices to be more available for their life together. She had given him 7 years, and Fletcher Mace had reduced them to a footnote. When Seraphina's turn to address the court arrived, she stood. She smoothed her dress, she gathered her folio, and from the gallery one of Dorian's friends, a man who had attended their wedding and eaten at their table and drunk their wine for a decade, laughed, not loudly, but audibly. The kind of laugh that says, "Look at her, just look at her," standing up there all alone like she has any idea what she's doing. Judge Elspeth's eyes moved to the gallery with a precision that silenced the sound immediately. But the damage of it, the casual public cruelty of it, sat in the air like smoke. Seraphina stood at the podium. She set her folio down. She looked at Judge Elspeth, and only at Judge Elspeth. "Your Honor," she said. And her voice was something remarkable. It was quiet. It was measured. It was absolutely without tremor. "I will not bore this court with grievance. I will speak only to the facts. I will let the documents speak to their own truth, and I am confident that by the end of these proceedings clarity will have been achieved." She sat back down. The gallery exchanged glances. Fletcher Mace leaned toward his associate and whispered something. The associate suppressed a smile. Dorian straightened his tie and looked across the aisle at Seraphina with an expression that said, plainly and without apology, "You have already lost." And the terrible thing, the thing that made watching her so unbearable, was that from every visible angle, every measurable metric, every observable reality in that courtroom, he appeared to be right. What nobody in that courtroom knew, what Dorian Ashford had somehow managed to remain willfully ignorant of for 9 years, including 7 years of marriage, was the precise and extraordinary nature of what Seraphina had walked away from when she married him. Her full name was Seraphina Eleanora Calloway. Calloway, as in Calloway International, the privately held conglomerate that controlled 17 subsidiaries across 5 continents. Luxury hospitality, medical technology, maritime shipping, private equity, a portfolio that made Dorian Ashford's real estate development company look, in technical terms, like a lemonade stand. The Calloway family did not appear in tabloids. They did not post on social media. They did not give press junkets or attach their name to charity galas for the photographs. They moved through the world the way certain geological forces move slowly, decisively, and with consequences that only become apparent long after the ground has already shifted beneath your feet. Seraphina's father, Reginald Calloway, was not merely wealthy. He was the kind of wealthy that has its own gravity. Seraphina had not chosen to keep this hidden out of shame. She had chosen to keep it hidden out of love. When she had met Dorian at 25, she was traveling under her maternal grandmother's surname for the privacy it afforded her, she had believed, with the earnest and terrible optimism of youth, that she had found something rare. A man who loved her for herself, not for her name, not for her bloodline, not for the access she represented. She had been wrong. She had not understood yet that Dorian's charm was a hunting instrument, that his warmth was transactional, that he was the kind of man who values what things can do for him and discards them the moment they stop performing that function. She had spent the first 2 years of their marriage hoping she was wrong about what she was beginning to see. She had spent the next 3 years quietly documenting what she was right about. And in the final 2 years, she had made peace with the truth that some structures, no matter how beautifully constructed, are built on foundations designed to collapse. She had told no one, not even her father, because Seraphina Calloway had her father's discipline. The discipline of someone who does not summon the cavalry until they know precisely where the battle is going to be fought. She had spent the 9 months since the separation in absolute deliberate solitude. She had moved into a modest apartment. She had declined every offer of financial support from her family. She had declined her father's lawyers, and her father had teams of them, specialists in forensic financial litigation, who had dismantled far more sophisticated deceptions than Dorian Ashford had ever managed to construct. She had said, not yet. Her father Reginald, who understood consequence the way most people understand whether something you read, something you prepare for, something you never underestimate, had listened to his daughter. He had waited. But he had not been idle. He had been watching. Seraphina had spent those 9 months building. Every document had been cataloged. Every financial record Dorian had ever believed was safely concealed had been located through channels he did not know existed. Every asset he had quietly restructured in anticipation of this divorce had been traced to its actual destination by accountants whose fees alone could have funded a small nation. She had done all of this quietly, without fanfare, without the armor of her family name, because she needed Dorian to perform his entire character publicly, before a judge, in a record before the ground shifted. She had needed him to say the words contributed nothing of substance in open court. She had needed his friends to laugh. She had needed his new fiancée to sit there in her ivory blazer looking triumphant. She had needed every single one of them to go all the way to the edge of their contempt before she showed them what was standing on the other side. The documents in her folio were simply the beginning. The real evidence was on its way. By 11:30 in the morning, Fletcher Mace had found his full rhythm. He moved through the courtroom with the confidence of a man who has performed this particular piece many times and knows all the applause points. He presented documents. He called his first witness Dorian's financial advisor, a carefully coached man who spoke about asset structures and investment timelines in the clipped, confident tone of someone who had rehearsed extensively and expected no meaningful challenge. There was no meaningful challenge. Seraphina sat at her table. She listened. She took notes. She did not object, not once, and this, more than anything, seemed to unsettle Fletcher Mace in ways he was too experienced to allow onto his face, but not experienced enough to prevent entirely from reaching his eyes. Why wasn't she objecting? Why wasn't she pushing back? He had prepared meticulously for a fight. He had preloaded responses to 17 different lines of counter-argument. He had a full second act, ready additional witnesses, supplementary exhibits, a forensic accountant prepared to testify. She was giving him nothing to push against. In the gallery, Dorian noticed it too. He leaned back in his chair with the visible satisfaction of a man watching a chess opponent make moves that confirm what he already suspected, that they simply don't understand the board. Margot caught his eye from the row behind and gave him a slow, private smile. "It's already over," her expression said. And yet, there were small things, small, almost imperceptible things that a very attentive person might have noticed. At 11:42, Seraphina's phone, silent, face down on the table beside her folio, lit up with a text. She did not reach for it immediately. She waited. Then, with the measured economy of movement that characterized everything she did, she turned the phone over, read the message, and set it face down again. Nothing in her expression changed, but something in her posture did. Something infinitesimally, unmistakably settled. Like a woman who has been standing at a window watching for headlights and has finally seen them appear at the top of the road. At 11:51, Seraphina's court-appointed document facilitator received a call. She stepped out into the corridor briefly. When she returned, her face carried the particular controlled blankness of someone who has been told something significant and been asked to maintain composure. She leaned down and whispered something to the bailiff. The bailiff looked up, just once, then resumed his neutral, practiced stillness. At 12:03, Fletcher Mace $900 hourly rate, 30 years of family law. A man professionally immune to intuition stopped mid-sentence while reviewing a document. He looked toward the main courtroom doors. He couldn't have said why. There was no sound from beyond those doors, no visible reason for his attention to move there. But it did. The doors were closed, still, quiet, and Fletcher Mace, who had not felt uncertain in a courtroom in approximately a decade, thought for just a fraction of a second something is coming. He shook the feeling away. He returned to his documents. He was wrong to. The afternoon session began at 1:15. And it was in this session that Dorian Ashford decided, with the particular cruelty of a man who believes consequences are for other people, that subtlety was no longer necessary. Fletcher Mace called his second witness. Dorian's mother, Mrs. Constance Ashford, 63, dressed in dove gray, the pearl clutcher from the gallery, took the witness stand with the solemn gravity of a woman performing her civic duty while privately relishing every second of it. Fletcher Mace guided her through her testimony with the practiced gentleness of a gardener coaxing a particularly useful bloom. Constance Ashford described her daughter-in-law's years in the marriage as distant, withholding, unwilling to truly invest herself in our family. She spoke of Seraphina's coldness, her lack of warmth, her apparent disinterest in building a real partnership. Every word was a weapon dressed in the language of maternal concern. In the gallery, several people shifted uncomfortably, not out of sympathy for Seraphina, but out of the particular discomfort of watching something excessively, almost artlessly cruel. Seraphina did not look at Constance Ashford while the woman spoke. She looked at the table before her. Her pen rested between two fingers. Still, the pearl earrings caught the afternoon light. When cross-examination was offered, Seraphina stood. She asked Constance Ashford 3 questions, quiet, precise, questions that touched with surgical accuracy on 3 specific occasions in which Constance Ashford had been witnessed by documented parties behaving in ways that rather dramatically contradicted the portrait of family warmth she had just attempted to paint. Constance Ashford's composure flickered. Twice. It was enough. But when Seraphina sat back down, the gallery's reaction was not admiration. It was something worse. The murmuring that moved through the rows of Dorian's supporters carried the particular tone of people recalibrating not toward Seraphina, but toward more comfortable contempt. She had challenged Constance Ashford, yes, but she was still alone. She was still a single woman at a single table with a leather folio and no attorney and no family and no visible support in any direction. And Dorian looked at her this time without the performative cruelty. This time with something almost worse, boredom. The boredom of a man who has stopped considering his opponent worth watching. He turned and spoke something to Fletcher Mace. They both smiled. Seraphina sat very still. Her pale green eyes moved for just one moment to the great wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. Closed, still, empty. She breathed. Once, slowly, and folded her hands on the table. The gallery was full of people who believed they were watching her final chapter. They had no idea they were watching her beginning. The doors were about to open. A silence. A true, complete, cinematic silence. Then the sound of doors. The great double doors at the rear of Courtroom 7 opened, and the room changed. It is difficult to articulate precisely why a room changes when certain people enter it. It is not always volume. It is not always spectacle. Sometimes with people of a particular kind of authority, it is simply the weight of their presence moving through the air like a pressure change. Like the moment before lightning when the atmosphere has already understood what is coming and has rearranged itself accordingly. The doors opened, and Reginald Calloway walked through them. A tall man, broad, silver-haired. A charcoal suit pressed with the precision of a military uniform. A single family crest pin on his lapel. He did not hurry. He has never needed to hurry. The world rearranges itself to accommodate his pace. He entered the courtroom the way a tide enters a shore, inevitable, unhurried, and fundamentally transformative. Behind him walked his legal team, not the city's most prestigious family law firm. Calloway International's private legal division. Attorneys who handled regulatory matters across 5 continents, who had appeared before international arbitration panels, who made Fletcher Mace look, in the most technical sense, like a very well-dressed student. They filed in quietly. They were dressed simply. They carried no visible drama. They didn't need to. The gallery noticed first. The murmuring began, and it was a different murmur than before. This was not the comfortable sound of collective contempt. This was the sound of people experiencing sudden, disorienting recalibration, people leaning toward each other, people whispering, "Who is that? Do you know who that is?" And then, as the Calloway name began to move through the room in whispers, "Oh my God," Fletcher Mace heard the gallery shift. He turned. His face performed, for exactly 2 seconds, the expression of a man who does not yet understand what he is seeing. Then, as Reginald Calloway's precise pale green eyes, the same eyes as Seraphina's unmistakably, undeniably the same eyes, swept the courtroom and landed with calm finality on his daughter's face, Fletcher Mace understood. And the color left his face as cleanly as water leaving a glass. Dorian Ashford was still looking at Fletcher Mace when he noticed the attorney's expression change. He turned to follow the gaze, and for the first time in this entire proceeding, for the first time, arguably, in years, Dorian Ashford's face went completely, utterly blank. The blankness of a man whose entire structural understanding of a situation has just been removed from beneath him. He looked at the tall, silver-haired man walking down the center of the courtroom. He looked at the attorneys filing in. And then his eyes moved to the small family crest pin on Reginald Calloway's lapel. He had seen that crest once before. Years ago. In a briefing document about a potential acquisition target that had turned out to be catastrophically, in retrospect far beyond the scale his company could even approach. Calloway. The name moved through his mind like a blade. Calloway. Seraphina Calloway. Behind him, Margot had gone completely rigid in her ivory blazer. Her beautifully manicured hand, which had been resting with such comfortable ownership on the back of Dorian's chair, lifted away from it, as if the chair had suddenly become something she didn't want to be associated with. Dorian's mother, Constance, in the front gallery row, watched Reginald Calloway walk past her with the expression of a woman who has just realized, with full and terrible clarity, that she has been performing her greatest role before the wrong audience. Reginald Calloway walked to the gallery bench directly behind Seraphina's table. He sat. He said nothing yet. He simply sat upright, quiet, immovable, directly behind his daughter, so that anyone looking at Seraphina would now unavoidably also see him. His legal team arranged themselves with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this versions of this many times before. A slow pan across the gallery. Dorian's supporters, the college friends, the business partners, the people who had laughed and whispered and exchanged knowing glances all morning, sitting now in a visibly different posture. Straighter, quieter. The comfortable cruelty of collective contempt replaced by the rigid discomfort of people suddenly very aware that the ledger is about to be read. In public, Seraphina had not turned around. She had not needed to. She had felt her father sit down behind her the way you feel the sun come from behind clouds, not through sight, but through warmth. Through the sudden, specific warmth of not being alone. She allowed herself just for a moment to close her eyes. One breath. Then she opened them. And something in the set of her shoulders, that careful, architectural, costly composure she had been holding for 9 months, like a woman holding an enormous weight, with both arms extended, shifted, not into weakness, into something stronger. The composure of a woman who is no longer holding something alone. Reginald Calloway reached forward from the gallery bench. His large, stubby hand rested once, briefly, with absolute certainty on his daughter's shoulder. Just that. Just a hand. And Seraphina reached up just for 1 second and placed her fingers over her father's. The courtroom was so quiet that this gesture, this small and private and devastating gesture, was visible to everyone. Judge Hargrove Elspeth, who had maintained the perfectly practiced neutrality of the bench through every dramatic moment of the morning's proceedings, allowed herself for exactly 1 unguarded second a look of deep, quiet recognition. She had seen many things in this courtroom. She had not seen this particular thing before. Reginald Calloway's pale green eyes moved with the unhurried, permanent attention of a man who does not blink when he is looking at something important across the aisle. To Dorian Ashford, he did not speak, he did not gesture, he simply looked. And Dorian Ashford, 41 years old, a broad-shouldered man in a tailored suit, who had walked into this courtroom this morning believing himself the most powerful person in it, looked away first. The recess was called at 2:17. It lasted 12 minutes. In those 12 minutes, more structural damage was done to Dorian Ashford's legal position than Fletcher Mace could have repaired in 12 months. It began the moment Judge Elspeth's door closed behind her and the courtroom exhaled into the complicated private chaos that follows a public realignment of power. Fletcher Mace crossed to the Calloway legal team's lead attorney, a woman named Dr. Amara Osei Bonsu, internationally regarded, impeccably calm, and a conversation that followed lasted approximately 4 minutes. Fletcher Mace did most of the talking at the beginning. By the end, he had stopped talking entirely. He was listening. And the expression on his face during that listening was the expression of a man receiving a tour of a building he believed he had owned and discovering, room by room, that the deed had always been someone else's. The Calloway financial documentation, 9 months of meticulous assembly, forensic accounting at a level Dorian's own team had not anticipated and could not immediately counter, had been filed with the court during the recess. Dr. Osei Bonsu did not announce this dramatically. She simply ensured it was placed before Judge Elspeth with the quiet efficiency of a woman accustomed to delivering decisive documents. The documents were 47 pages. They told a very different story than anything this courtroom had heard this morning. When the session reconvened, Dorian Ashford sat in his chair in a different way than he had all morning. The architecture of his posture, that broad-shouldered, deliberate, performative ease, had collapsed inward by degrees so subtle that an inattentive observer might have missed it. But it was there. The shoulders lower, the jaw tighter, the hands previously open, relaxed, the hands of a man who knows he is winning now interlaced on the table before him with the whitening knuckles of a man holding on to the last stable surface in a tilting world. Margot had removed herself from the gallery. Quietly, without announcement. Halfway through the recess, she had simply stood, gathered her things, and left. No one called after her. No one seemed surprised. Dorian had noticed. He had not looked at the door when it closed behind her. He had looked at his hands. Fletcher Mace returned from his conversation with Dr. Osei Bonsu and sat beside his client. He began speaking in a low, careful, rapid voice. Dorian listened. His expression, as he listened, moved through several distinct phases: disbelief, recalculation, and finally, in the last phase, something that was almost unprecedented on his face. Fear. Not the performed kind. Not the kind that is strategic or tactical or deployed for effect. Real fear. The fear of a man who has built his entire self-concept around the belief that he is the cleverest person in any room he inhabits and has just discovered, definitively, irreversibly, that he has been in a room designed entirely by someone else. That every door he thought he was opening was a door she had already unlocked from the other side. That the isolation he had been so privately delighted by all morning had not been a vulnerability. It had been architecture. Across the aisle, Reginald Calloway sat behind his daughter. He had not moved. He had not spoken except when addressed. He did not grandstand. He did not perform. He simply existed in that room, his presence, his name, his unmistakable eyes, and let the weight of that existence do what weight does naturally. Press downward. Hold things in their correct position. At one point during the reconvened session, Dorian made the mistake, the final, critical mistake of looking directly at Reginald Calloway. He was looking for something. Mercy, perhaps recognition, some acknowledgement that this could still be negotiated back to manageable ground. Reginald Calloway looked back at him. Pale green eyes. Still, absolute. The eyes of a man who loves his daughter and has spent 9 months being disciplined enough to let her fight her own battle, and has now, with the timing of someone who understands exactly when the moment is right, arrived to stand behind her. Not to fight for her, to stand with her. There was no mercy in those eyes. There was something more powerful than mercy. There was consequence. The settlement was reached 3 days later. Full, comprehensive, unambiguous, Seraphina received everything she had documented, everything she had earned. Everything she had built during 7 years of a marriage that had taken more from her than anyone in that courtroom had initially been willing to acknowledge. She received it not because of her family's power, though that power had ensured the truth could not be buried. She received it because of 9 months of meticulous, disciplined, extraordinary personal work. Because she had done what very few people in the depths of public humiliation managed to do, she had refused to collapse. She had refused to perform. She had refused to spend her anguish on spectacle when she could spend it on strategy. The morning after the settlement was signed, Seraphina had breakfast with her father at the Calloway estate. A morning room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Pale winter light, the kind of silence that is not empty but full. Reginald poured the tea. Seraphina sat with both hands around her cup. "He thought I was alone," Seraphina said. Quietly, her father looked at her over the rim of his cup. "My darling," he said, "you have never been alone. You simply chose the moment to show him what that meant. This is the lesson that lives at the heart of this story. It is not simply about revenge. It is not simply about a dramatic entrance or a legal victory or the spectacular collapse of a man's arrogance. It is about something deeper and more permanent than any of those things. It is about the danger of mistaking someone's restraint for weakness, their silence for surrender, their solitude for abandonment. Some people stand alone in courtrooms because they have no one. And some people stand alone in courtrooms because they are waiting with patience and intelligence and the particular quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what is standing behind that closed door for precisely the right moment. Seraphina Calloway knew who she was. She had always known. She had simply declined to perform it for an audience that hadn't earned the right to witness it yet. And now she sat in a morning room full of winter light with her father's study presence across the table and the knowledge that the chapter she had survived would never define her, but the way she survived it absolutely would.